On November 28, 1773, the tea ship Dartmouth arrived in Boston Harbor laden with tea. British law required that the Dartmouth must unload its cargo and pay the duties within 20 days, or customs officials could seize the cargo and unload it onto American soil. Sam Adams called for a mass meeting to be held at Faneuil Hall. The very next day, when a larger than expected crowd packed the hall, the meeting was moved to the larger Old South Meeting House. The meeting passed a resolution introduced by Adams based on a similar set of resolutions passed in Philadelphia. It urged the captain of the Dartmouth to send the ship back to England without paying the import duty. At the same time, 25 men were assigned to watch the ship and prevent the tea from being unloaded. However, Governor Hutchinson was determined to uphold the law, and he refused to grant permission for the Dartmouth to leave without paying the duty. Soon, two more tea ships arrived, the Eleanor and the Beaver. They were in Boston Harbor, and several more meetings occurred between concerned Bostonians, ship owners, and Governor Hutchin to work through the impasse. But the governor would not move from his position. On December 16, 1773, which was the last day of the Dartmouth's deadline to pay the duty, 5,000 to as much as 7,000 people, or roughly a third of the population of Boston, gathered in and around the Old South Meeting Hall. After receiving a report that Governor Hutchinson had once again refused to let the ships leave without paying the duty, Adams announced that this meeting can do nothing further to save the country. Now, according to a popular story, Adams's statement was a pre-arranged signal for the Tea Party to begin. However, according to eyewitness accounts, people did not leave the meeting until 10 or 15 minutes after Adams' alleged signal. And Adams, in fact, tried to stop people from leaving because the meeting was not yet over. While Adams tried to reassert control of the meeting, many people poured out of the Old South Meeting House and were prepared to take action. That evening, a group of about 60 men donned blankets and Mohawk costumes. They blackened their faces and marched to Griffin's Wharf. While disguising their faces in this manner would become necessary because of the planned illegality of their protest, dressing as Mohawk warriors was a different matter. It may be that they, the Sons of Liberty, wanted to send a message to King George that they were more identified with America than with their official status as subjects of the crown. The men rowed out to and boarded 3 vessels, and over the course of the next 3 hours, they dumped all of the tea into Boston Harbor. The property damage amounted to the destruction of some 92,000 pounds of tea in 342 chests. And that is how it came to me. I must admit that although I wrote in June 1774 that the cause of Boston ever will be considered as the cause of America, I privately voiced my disapproval of their conduct in destroying the tea. I and others believe that one's private property should be inviolate, that neither man nor government should be able to seize or destroy it without just cause. So we denounced this act of lawlessness and violence and thought that the perpetrators should compensate the East India Company for the damages. Many Americans shared our sentiments and viewed the destruction of the tea in Boston as an act of vandalism by radicals, rather than a heroic and patriotic undertaking. In Britain, even those politicians who were considered to be sympathetic to the cause of the colonies were also appalled. This act, for the first time, had the result of uniting all of the parliamentary parties together against the colonies. Even Benjamin Franklin stated that the East India Company should be paid for the destroyed tea, all 90,000 pounds of it. Robert Murray, a New York merchant, went to Lord North with 3 other merchants, and they offered to pay for the losses, but the offer was turned down. The ministry had a better idea of how to make Boston pay. Whether or not Sam Adams helped to plan the destruction of the tea is disputed, but he immediately worked to publicize and to defend it. He argued that the Tea Party was not an act of a lawless mob, but was instead a principled protest and the only remaining option the people had to defend their constitutional rights. And yet there were those who supported this gesture. Surprisingly, in his December 17, 1773 entry in his diary, which we recently gained access to, John Adams wrote this: "Last night 3 cargoes of Bohea tea were emptied into the sea. This morning a man of war sails." This is the most magnificent movement of all. There is a dignity, a majesty, a sublimity in this last effort of the patriots that I greatly admire. The people should never rise without doing something to be remembered, something notable and striking. This destruction of the tea is so bold, so daring, so firm, intrepid, and inflexible, and it must have so important consequences and so lasting that I can't but consider it as an epocha in history. I am sure if John knew that we knew his innermost thoughts about the destruction of the tea, he would be embarrassed and he might even blush. Who of us want others to know what we are really thinking? Quite frankly, the only time I ever saw John red-faced was when he was shouting at others during a heated discussion. However, John and many other Americans after the destruction of the tea at Boston considered tea drinking to be unpatriotic. In fact, tea drinking declined during and after the Revolution and resulted in a shift to another beverage, another preferred hot drink, coffee, in the colonies.